Alright, what's going on everybody, man? Welcome. This is my Patreon only series, and today we're going to be talking about the first step. I'm going to be introducing my course, and I'm going to be talking about how does it really work, what are the rhythm lines, where to start, what brushes to use. I'm going to be talking about proportion and lines, and I'm going to be showing you the real-time examples of all the different angles, and we're going to talk about common mistakes and how to learn from them. So let's start out from the beginning. How does this thing work? So you might have heard me talk about it before. These are not just some general tutorials that you just watch and forget. These are really meant to be exercises that you follow. So this is really the course that I've been developing for the last year of really trying to find how to break down this shit so you can really follow some steps. Because the biggest thing that I'm seeing in everybody is that they try to do too many shit at the same time and it never works. You know what I'm saying? So I wanted to make sure that whatever you're working at the moment is really simplified and you know exactly what you're doing. It's not just some, random exercise because, you just feel like doing it. So the way that it works is I have the Angels Patreon playlist that you can find on Patreon, and then every week I do the Patreon live streams where I critique your work. I show you all the different mistakes that you're doing. This is, somebody who had a progress in just 1 week. And what it is that you just follow all the things that I talk about in the tutorials, you apply them over and over again, and then you get to the next step. But I don't want you to go to the next step unless I tell you on the live streams that you're ready for it. Because again, if you try to do too many things at the same time, it's not gonna work. So I also wanted to show you that this shit really works. Shout out to my patron Alexis. This is her work in January 2020. This is her work in June 2020. So that's literally progress in only 6 months. You can even look at her Instagram. Shout out Alexis as usual. So if you go down, you can see her post like January 28th, and then she signed up on the Patreon. I think it was around March. That's like her first exercise. And then slowly but surely, she kept on doing them and doing them and doing them. And now she's doing females, and that's the type of work that she's doing. So this shit, again, it really works, but you have to really be focused and make sure that you're taking it one step at a time. As you can see, Alexis didn't do any color studies. She didn't do any goofy original characters, none of that shit. She just focused on the exercises and focused on whatever step, was on her level. And by the way, you can also download this PDF in the description for free, which is really gonna show you all the different steps of my course, which is really gonna cover first the lay-in, which is really you learning about how to create a 3D phase, learning about proportion, learning about basic lines. And then we have the plane set ahead, which is really all about the structure and the form, like really learning the anatomy. And then we have the line weight, which is how do you turn a structural sketch into actual line art, which is gonna help you for the shading. And then we have the shading. The first step is really shading the planes, separating the light and the shadow. And then we have shading transitions, which is how do you transition these basic breakdown into something that actually looks like a portrait. And then finally we have the rendering, which is adding all the little details and all the little transitions. So again, you can download that in the description along with all of the other files. They're all going to be in the description, so make sure you download them and really see these steps, like try to do the first exercise. Now let's talk about what are the rhythm lines. So I wish I could take credit for this, but this was actually invented way before I was born. It's called the Riley method, and it's something that I've been studying for a long time. And me kind of studying it and studying Andrew Loomis and all these other different teachers, I've kind of created my own sort of thing, which kind of makes sense for me, and it's a little bit more simplified than what I've seen from other people. And what it is abstract lines that just follow all of the different rhythms of the face. So this is not the only way to learn portrait painting. I think that's one thing that people get wrong. Oh, if I don't do this, I'm never gonna be able to paint faces. I'm not saying this. This is just a method that you can use to kind of learn it faster and really see what's wrong with your drawing. Because if you don't really use a method, if you don't really have some guidelines that you're following, you're just gonna create this weird face and you don't really you're not really gonna know what's wrong with it. If you ever look at your drawings, do you ever ask yourself what am I even supposed to fix in this? Like, I don't know what's wrong. You know what I'm saying? So this is really gonna show you, you know, you have this line here, you have this line there. So it's not an actual face. That's the other thing. It's just something, it's kind of like the first step of drawing a face. You know, that should just get you started. And it's really connected with what we're gonna talk about in the next video, which is gonna be wait, let me pull this up, which is going to be the Arrowhead, which is going to be all of the planes. So these two things are meant to work together. And you first start out with the most basic form, which is really the rhythm lines. You build up a 3D structure, and then on top of it, you add the planes at the head. So in the beginning, these lines might not make a lot of sense. You know, they might just look like some weird lines that you just added on top of a face. But that's kind of like what it always feels like. So you need to get through this stage, force yourself to draw these lines until you can actually start seeing them and start seeing where they fit on the face. And when that happens, you really can break down a face from any type of an angle. So the goal is to really be able to create a 3D form of a face, not just a flat face. Remember, that's the biggest problem that I'm seeing in beginners, is they just draw a flat face. Even if you look at Alexis's previous work, you can see how it has some eyes, there's a little bit of a nose, there's even some color, but there's not really any sort of a form. Like, you don't really look at this and go like, ooh, that's a face. Like, you just look at it and it's more like symbols. If you look at this work, this is so 3D, like there's some form, there's some structure, there's some light. So the goal is to really learn about all of these things one step at a time. So really the first step is learning about the abstract lines and learning how to create, how to turn a face into a basic form. So even if they don't make sense, push yourself, try to force yourself to do it over and over again. It usually takes at least 50 different sketches. And also, if you haven't downloaded the 100 references, make sure that in the description I'm gonna add them, 100 free references. Make sure that you use them for this exercise. And then we have where to start. So the first thing to start is with really figuring out your brushes, because if you don't have the right brush, it's going to be really hard to create this sort of an effect and really learn about lines. So if you haven't downloaded my brushes, you can download them at aganev.com/brushes. Right here, you write your email and they're going to be there. If they're not there, make sure you check out the spam box, because you know that happens sometimes. So when you download the brushes, if you're using Photoshop, you go to your two presets, because right here I have them named, and then you click in here, you click replace two presets. Now the two presets is just something that I use so it can actually be easier for me to pick all the top 10 brushes that I use. But if you don't have that, or you're not using Photoshop, if you're using Procreate, what you need to do is you need to actually do some extra settings. So let me show you. Download my brush, and then you're looking for this triangle right here. So the triangle is going to be the sketch brush that I use all the time. This is the only brush that I use for any sort of lines. So if you're using Procreate, you need to kind of do some extra settings. So you find the triangular brush, and then you click on it and you go to Brush Studio. Now you go to the menu taper and you just copy all of these settings. You know, you can pause this video, you copy the pressure taper, the size, opacity, pressure, all of this stuff, and then you go to Apple Pencil right here, and then you copy all of this other stuff, you press all of this none stuff, and it might look a little bit complicated, but I swear this is going to be so useful. So then you go to properties, and then you copy this thing as well. Minimum size, minimum opacity, maximum opacity, all of this stuff. So the end goal of this brush should be a brush that actually allows you to have different type of pressure, and it never goes the full dark color. So the biggest problem that, I mean, I've said the biggest problem a lot of times, but I swear I see a lot of problems with beginners. So this is probably not the biggest problem, but it's still a pretty big problem, is that they use a really ink brush. Like, they use these really strong brushes and they're not able to create any sort of line weight. So how do you expect to create like strong lines or faded lines or any different type of lines if your brush doesn't allow you to. So the brush that you're looking for is, if you're pressing very lightly, you should be able to create very faded lines, and if you press harder, you're able to create very dark and bigger lines. But you should never go full black, because the thing is, you're looking for this build-up effect, and really what the build-up is, it allows you to create these lines that actually, when they stack upon each other, they look more heavy. Because again, if you just have the sort of like, look at the difference between these two lines, right? Like, look at the one on the left and look at the one on the right. Like, there's a huge difference. So if you don't have that build-up, you know, your sketch is just gonna look really shitty. So make sure that you do that stuff, and always use the ink brush for any sort of exercises. Then we have measuring proportion and erasing lines. Now, this is really important because, as I said, this exercise is all about getting the right proportions. So you really need to make sure that as you're working, you're not just creating some, you know, version of your own, but you're actually having the proportion of the reference. So what you need to do first is set up your file right. So right in the middle, you put the actual reference, then you copy paste it, you know, you put it on the left, and then you drop the opacity down to 50%. The reason why we're doing that is because on top, we're gonna be doing the tracing, which is really gonna show you exactly where these lines go. Now, a lot of people, you know, have this misconception that tracing, you know, is bad, or, you know, you're just wasting your time. And that's kind of the truth. You're just trying to copy somebody's work and you're just tracing it. Like, there's no really point in that. But for these exercises, tracing is going to be really useful because, again, all of these abstract lines, especially in the beginning, are not going to make a lot of sense. So you really need to draw them first on top of the portrait so you know exactly where they go. So when we're doing the freehand, you know, you can actually see your lines and be like, oh, that's where it goes. That's what line I'm supposed to do. So it's just much easier, and it's really easy for you to break it down. But if you only do tracings, then you're not really progressing because you're not doing the freehand. Remember, the freehand is what gets you good. The tracing is what makes sure that you're doing the right thing. So after you have the file set up, what you do is you have these measuring lines. So I drew a couple of lines for the eyebrows. You might do an additional one right here for the eyes, like right here. And then you have one line for the eyebrows, one for the eyes, one for the nose, one for the chin, and one for the hairline. This is on a separate layer. Let me show you. So this is on a separate layer, and I just turn it on and off as I'm drawing, just to kind of check while I'm doing the exercise. You don't just use this while you're drawing, because then you're just completely you know, doing the grid system, and then you're not really getting better because you're not really measuring with your eyes. What we're trying to actually develop is your hand and eye coordination, where you look at something and you're able to actually draw it and actually measure it with your eyes. The only thing that we're doing the measuring lines for is to actually check ourselves if we're going on the right path. So what you can do is you just turn it on, you see how you're doing. You know, if you can, if you have some mistakes, you can make your sketch smaller, bigger. You can kind of move it around. You can kind of erase it, all of that stuff. But remember, you don't just leave them on like this. Another trick that you can kind of use is you get your layer with your sketch, and then you put it on top of the actual reference, and then you see where the lines are. You see, like, for example, you see how I made the mouth a little bit too tall. That's one thing that I can, you know, grab it with the lasso and pull it down here. But if you're just starting out, I'll actually recommend you to just completely erase the whole mouth and just try to do it all over again, because really we're trying to go for mileage. So even if it takes you, like, you know, 2 hours to do this exercise, it's gonna be much better to have 1-2 hour drawing, which is actually, you know, the right proportion and good lines, rather than doing 20 different sketches for, like, you know, 5 minutes. Like, that's not what we're going for. We're not just trying to get through all of the different sketches, even though, you know, I usually say that it takes around 50 different sketches to kind of get to know the lay-in. If you just blow them by in like 5 minutes, it's gonna take you forever. You know what I'm saying? So it's all about you just being kind of like slow, but at the same time, not overthinking it. So what you want to do, you just want to check yourself every like 5-10 minutes how you're doing, and to just take your time to really measure out all of the different proportions. Now, another thing that I do is when I look at the reference, I actually measure out different spaces. So for example, I look at the nose and I look at how it's relating to the eye. For example, I'll look at the corner of the nose and I'll look that there's a straight line going from the corner of the nose to the corner of the eye. Now we look at our sketch. Is that how it is? That's what I use to kind of check myself even more. For example, you look at the corner of the jaw, you look at the corner of the mouth. What is that angle? Like, what does that angle show you? It's not completely straight. It's more a little bit like this. Now we look at our drawing. That's how we have it. It's not completely straight, yet it's not it's not super extreme. So I do this all the time. Like, I got OCD or some shit for proportions. Like, I'm constantly just comparing angles. I'm constantly, doing different type of measurements. Sometimes you do them with your eyes. If it's really hard for you, if you're just a complete beginner, you can do it on top of the reference and just kind of like measure, for example, from the eyebrow to the corner of the hairline. Like, it's not specific, like you can just invent your own. For example, corner of the eye to the corner of the eyebrow. I'm just doing that all over and over again, just so I make sure that whatever I'm drawing is relating to everything else. Like, I feel like a lot of people just kind of like don't really care about that shit, and they just kind of blow by it, and they're just like, oh, fucking proportions, man, I never get them right. Well, because you don't fucking try to. You actually have to really force yourself to look at what's wrong with it. You know what I'm saying? Like, again, just drawing shit is not just for fun or something. You can have fun when you learn about it, but in the beginning, it's fucking pure focus if you paying attention to proportions, different angles. So make sure that you're using the lines again. Then you put your lines on top of the measuring lines, and then you put your sketch on top of the reference. You kind of see what your mistakes are, and then another thing is measuring the proportions with the different angles on the face. And then we have erasing lines. Now this is really, really important because, as I said, beginners have a huge problem with lines. So I'm going to show you this more in the real-time examples, but as I'm drawing, you're going to see that I'm using very faded lines. I'm pressing very, very lightly to kind of find the proportions first. And then when I'm sure of something, then I make it kind of quote-unquote pretty. I'm pressing more, I'm being more confident. So as I said, a lot of people, they just kind of blow by, don't really care about either proportion or line, and they just try to copy the reference. They're like, oh, whatever, baby. You know what I'm saying? And you just end up with something that is going to be even harder to correct later. So as I'm drawing, you're going to see how I'm pressing very lightly. I'm trying to find the proportions first, and then I press harder on top of the lines. And another thing is I'm using a lot of the eraser. I think a lot of people think that eraser is only for erasing. I mean, that's in the fucking name. But another thing that I use it for is what I call sculpting. So what I mean when I say sculpting is, let's say we have this line, right? So I might get the eraser and sculpt this line so it might be a little bit more narrow and a little bit more thick in here. Now we're gonna talk a lot more about this in a later video where we talk about line weight and all that stuff, but I just wanted to show you that the eraser is used for 3 different things. First, we have the sculpting, as I showed you. Then we have actual erasing, where I just erase what I have. And then we have glazing. Now, glazing is what I call just kind of going over on top very, very lightly and just kind of like fading out. If you've ever used kneaded eraser in traditional drawing, that's what I use the eraser for. I just go very lightly and I just kind of fade out my lines. So a big thing that I do is, as I'm drawing, first I'm like pressing not as hard. You can barely even see this circle. And then even as I'm drawing, you're gonna see a lot of lines, they kind of stack up on each other. It becomes really messy. So I keep going back with a really big eraser and I just kind of fade out my lines. So when you fade out your lines, you can still kind of see them, but it prevents you from just kind of like building up this real kind of mess. So I'm occasionally just kind of fading out my lines and I'm just kind of repeating them. And what you really have to think about for just kind of drawing just in general is that you're always building a structure. Like, you're always building this actual big thing. Like, you're not just creating this quick drawing, like this quick sketch, none of that stuff, you know. Whatever, if you draw a circle, you're still building a circle. You don't just draw like a quick circle that you just don't care about. And when you have that mindset, it just changes everything, because then you're using the eraser, the smudge, the liquify, whatever. They're all going for the big structure. So I start out very faded out, and then when I'm sure of it, I start really repeating it and really developing it. That's a key word, is really developing your line art. Like, I see a lot of people, they just kind of, again, mindlessly, create this sort of sketch. Like, you always need to know what you're working on. So these are all the basics, and now let me show you an example of the Riley method, and then we're gonna talk about exactly where all of these lines go. So I'm just gonna draw it kind of quick, just to show you, all of the different lines, and then we're going to talk about exactly how it works. So we start out with a basic circle, chop off the sides, then we have split in the middle for the eyebrow line, then we have another line in the middle, then we find the nose, then we find the chin, then we find the hairline, we have the eye area, boom, the mouth area, then we have the arch going in here, you have the chin oval, in here you go down like this, you have the jaw, and then you have the eyeballs, nose shape with a bottom plane of the nose, the lips, and then a circle for that forehead to show you the roundness of the forehead, and then that second circle going around like this. So again, really quickly, you're not supposed to do it this quick, you're supposed to use a reference and all of that stuff, but I just kind of wanted to show you the basics first before we talk about all of the different areas. Okay, let me show you now on all of these three different angles where each of those lines go and talk more about it. So you first start out with that initial circle, which is really gonna capture that basic bow of the head. And the best way to explain that is to show you on top of the skull, because there's no neck, there's no hair, none of that. So if you look at the back of the head, you can kind of see how it's already rounded. So if you just continue it, you're really gonna get a circle. So you're not really looking at the hair, you're not really following the outline of the head, you're more outlining just the skull of the person. And if you look at the front view, you're gonna see how it's not perfectly round. Like people have this sort of a square side but round front and back. So what it is the best way to imagine it is to imagine a bow which has its sides chopped off. So see how right here on the side it's a lot more flat. So that's what I draw. I draw a circle kind of like this, and then I chop off those sides. That was a horrible circle. So a circle, and then I chop off those sides to really show that right here on the side it's gonna be flat. If you look at the 3/4, that initial circle is gonna be in here, and then that second circle is gonna be in here, the chop off, right? So one thing that I feel like a lot of beginners start overthinking and kind of like get wrong is that they think that an initial circle needs to be perfect, Actually, there's more like two type of people. Like people who want to make the perfect circle and they like spend hours just doing one circle, and then people who really don't care about that circle and they make a potato and then everything else looks really wrong. So what you have to do is, I've been doing this shit for fucking years and I still can't make perfect circles. So it's totally okay, if you need to use Control Z, if you kind of like need to move it a little bit or something. It doesn't need to be perfect because later on you're gonna see how that initial circle is not even in the final. Like, because later when we actually draw the sides of the face and the top of the head and all of that stuff, that initial circle disappears. So you just need it to kind of start with something. So You just think about roughly where the skull is gonna be. You try to like do your best, and you just kind of outline the skull, and then you chop off the sides. With the profile, what's gonna happen is that, you know, that circle is gonna be like right here, and the second circle is gonna be in here, the chop off. So it's not gonna be back in here, because back in here, you know, let me show you this right here with the green, it's gonna be back to round. So the flat shape is really gonna be this thing right here. And where that second circle goes, actually this is horrible because I told you not to think about it. The hair needs to go down like this. That's a way better circle. So where that second circle goes is it touches the corner of the face. So if you imagine that there's the head is in a box, you're gonna see how in here you're gonna have the front plane and you're gonna have the side plane. So you always need to think about where that corner of the head is. And of course, you know, naturally the forehead is kind of rounded, so you're not gonna see an exact corner. But if there was a corner, you know, where would it be? And it usually is at the corner of the eyebrow, but you know, people just kind of like look at an eyebrow and they're like, there's no corners. Well, okay, if there was a corner, it'll be right here, right? Like in some people, especially kind of fuck boys, you can definitely see the corner of the eyebrow. So that's where that second circle goes. Now, I see a lot of people, you know, the second circle, they draw it kind of small like this. Is something that doesn't really make any sense, because remember, you're trying to show the side of the face. You're not just drawing some random oval. And with all of these lines, you know, as I'm explaining it to you and you're trying to draw them, try to really imagine as if they're like parts of the face. Like, don't just draw some, I know they're supposed to be abstract lines, but when you get good, you're gonna see how they really make sense. Like when you put them on top of the face, they really belong there. So try your best to really like picture what is this line showing. You know, it's not just a random oval sitting in the air. So that, you know, second circle is really gonna show you the side of the face. So when you're drawing it, really think about that side of the face. Again, not just a small circle in here. It usually starts right here from the top. Actually, I think the skull is the best place to explain it. So it's right here on the top and it goes right here on the bottom to the nose. So if you have to picture it, it's kind of from the forehead to the bottom of the nose. And a really important thing when it comes to measuring all of these different lines and all that stuff is to really look for places where whatever the angle is, that place is always going to remain like a measuring spot. For example, that arch right here that I showed you and the eye area, they're always going to touch. Like that's one of those things where no matter on the angle, no matter on the person, those two rhythm lines are always going to touch. But for example, let's say for example that initial circle and the nose, sometimes the nose might be inside of that initial circle, sometimes it might be going outside of it, you know. So don't try to make kind of like conclusions. Like I think a lot of beginners make the wrong conclusion. Like sometimes they might draw two references and they might see like the lip is touching the circle and they're like, oh, it always touches the circle. Now it really depends. So try to kind of especially in the beginning, like just try to do your best. Accept that the first stand are gonna completely fucking suck, but as you get better, try to imagine that the lines are there and try to really look for those key points, which I'm gonna talk about later as I'm going through this stuff. Another really one of those key points is gonna be that the mouth circle is gonna go over the nose. So no matter what, if you look at it here, see how that mouth goes around and then mouth circle goes up. So that's one of those things that's always gonna happen. But again, for something like, you know, the lip going below the circle or something like that, don't try to make any conclusions. Just draw from a lot of references and try to imagine where those lines. And again, that's why you need to practice, because even if you watch these videos and they kind of make sense, unless you just do the practice, you know, you're just watching, you're not really getting better. So we have that initial circle, we have the side circle, then we have the eyebrow line. So the eyebrow line is, the best way to explain it is with this 3/4 angle right here. You're showing the eyebrow line, but then it goes to the side of the face. So with the front view, you know, it's probably pretty much gonna be like a straight line like this, right? But that's a horrible way to think about it, because then you only are thinking about a line. If you look at the 3/4, you're really looking at the rotation of the whole head. So in here, again, if you imagine the box, this is like one side of the box, this is the other side of the box. This is following the perspective of the box. So even if you don't know what perspective is, and don't try to overthink, but just remember that it follows this eyebrow line, follows the eyebrows, and then it goes from the corner of the eyebrow to the top of the ear. You know, so it's not gonna be straight like this. And actually almost try to stay away from drawing a straight eyebrow line, because then you're really making it flat, because you know you're showing that the side of the face and the front of the face are going to be aligned, which what does that mean is that there's no rotation, you know what I'm saying, there's no perspective, so that means that it's flat. So even if it's small, like try to really think about it, you know, as if they're kind of like separate lines. So in here there's going to be one line for the eyebrows and one for the split of the second circle. So you can almost imagine that this line right here belongs to the second circle, and you can split it later with this line for the ear like this, and this line in here is for the eyebrow. So there's two separate lines, and in here you have this line, and then you have this right here. Usually this line right here for the ear is gonna be somewhere in the center of the circle, but again, because the perspective of something, or you know, in this front view in here, you might see how it's a little bit below the center. So it's not like, again, like people measure the wrong things. Try to measure this person's proportions and where those lines go. And then we have feature measurements. Oh, I actually forgot to write the middle line. So after you have the eyebrow line, you have the middle line, which is really gonna show you like just the middle of the face. You know, with the front view, it's really easy. Try to nail it down like this, and then in here you have it kind of like this, and then with the profile you have it going like this. Now, especially with 3/4, that middle line is actually gonna be kind of a curve, because the face, again, it's not flat. So when you kind of looking on the side, you're gonna see how there's a curvy line. So think about how this line is wrapping around the face. You know, it's not just a random line like a tattoo or something. Actually, a tattoo is not that bad, because if you draw an actual tattoo in here, it's gonna be wrapping around. It's just not a straight line like this. You know, it's following the face. And then we have the feature measurements. So after you have this basic structure, which shows you the bow, the side, the middle, and the eyebrows, then you find out where the features are. So I just use kind of like a simple line to find the hairline, the nose, and the chin, and just kind of have a basic measurements of where those go, because it's really important to find the proportion of the features, because everybody's gonna have different proportions naturally. So that's what I just use, a really basic line. And just as a general proportion, it usually is this right here is going to be the same size as this, and it's going to be the same size as this. But if you look at this person, you know, his nose and his mouth are a little bit bigger than his forehead. So again, it really depends on the person. But as you're doing a study, that's why you just use these simple lines to kind of like do a line, and then you look at the reference, you know, like, is that how big it is? You know, you use the measuring lines that we talked about before. Let me show you. So the lines that you have in here, you just draw them like this, the guidelines, to see exactly what your mistakes are. So that's the feature measurements. Then you have the eye area. Now this is really important and very key, because a lot of people, when they start drawing the eyes and stuff, they immediately just start thinking about the eyelid or something. But where does that eyelid belong to? Like, it's just like that no longer it looks flat, because there's no structure in there. So just as a general rule, when it comes to faces and pretty much everything in drawing, you always go from big to small. So you always think about the biggest possible plane, and then you think about a smaller plane, and then you have a smaller plane, and then you have a smaller one. So the biggest thing for the eyes is this eye area, or actually what I call eye area, I just named it like this. So it's gonna be really this shape like that. So it's gonna be kind of like really keeping it as simple as possible, just kind of like 4 lines like this. And what it represents is really the whole eyebrow shape and kind of like covering the eyes. And a really key thing to think about is how this thing is actually going inside of the face. So a lot of people, again, they don't really think about this and they just draw an eye on top of a flat surface. So you need to think about how this thing that I'm drawing right now with a red is like a separate structure. It's like a separate plane that goes inside of the face. You can almost imagine like somebody's wearing a mask. You know, you're only seeing that part. So you just represent it with 4 simple lines. You already have the top one, then you have the side one, you have the bottom, and then you have this. And it usually, like, actually a profile is probably the best way to explain it. So this thing with the green, see how the eyebrow goes down and then the eyebrow goes in here, and then you just repeat this and then you repeat this, and it should go somewhere. Like if you look really close, you can kind of see how where it's ending. It's right here. You know, this is the eye area. And later when we get to the planes, we're actually gonna make it a little bit more complicated. I'm gonna show you next video how we turn these 4 lines into actually 5 lines, and we have an additional plane in here and all of that stuff. But for now, just keep it as simple as possible and really just draw 4 lines. And again, what you really need to think about when you're drawing all of these lines is really like different type of planes when it comes to the face. So for example, when we do the arch, what we're really doing, I'm going to show you in a minute, is we're splitting the face into different separate areas. You know, you have the jaw area, and then in here you have kind of like the cheek area. So the same goes for that eyebrow area. Like it just splits it into this thing with the grain. You know what I'm saying? Like you're just trying to separate. So we start out with the biggest shape possible. We just start out with a bow, and then we break it down into smaller and smaller shapes. It's exactly actually like, kind of like sculpting. So if you ever seen somebody sculpt or you sculpted yourself, you always start out with the biggest mass, and then you create like a bigger plane, and then a smaller plane, and then a smaller plane. But you never start out with just like sculpting an eye when you don't even have an sort of an eye area. You know what I'm saying? So that's where it goes. With the front view, it's gonna be kind of like going inside like this. It's gonna be going down like this below the eyes. And then we have nose area and bottom plane. Now the same goes for the nose. You know, it's not just, you know, 2 holes like the Voldemort shit that I always talk about. Wait, I didn't draw the eye in here. But the way that I represent it is we already have this line in here, and I just go around like this with the horseshoe shape. So I just follow it around and I just map it out like this. Boom. And then I always think about the bottom plane of the nose. So the biggest and most important thing when it comes to noses, I have a whole tutorial on YouTube, so you can watch that. But the best thing to think about the nose is just its shape and then the bottom plane. That's the only thing that you need to think about. So in here with the profile, you have this, and then you have the bottom plane. Again, horseshoe, bottom plane, and it just goes like, it doesn't go as up as the eyebrow, but it's somewhere in the middle in here. So see, a lot of people draw it down here or up here, but it's gonna be right in the middle of where the nose connects right here to the eyebrow. You know, that's where the horseshoe shape ends. And then we have mouth, circle, and oval. So the same way that we broke down the features into their own shapes, big shapes, we have the mouth with a circle. So that circle, as I told you before, goes above the nose, and it just follows the mouth area. Wait, I need a couple of tries to do that circle. But it's really gonna be around the shape. So it's the same with the lips. People just try to draw basic lips on top of nothing, and it looks really flat. It's gonna be a lot more like a bow, and then the lips are wrapping around the bow. So that's where it goes. It usually actually follows like the top. That circle really follows the top line of the bottom plane of the circle. But in here, you know, this person's nose is a little bit small, but you know, it's just one of those things where it might change, but you always need to think about how this bow is going to be going around. And I see a lot of people, this is a really common mistake when it comes to the mouth bow and the second mouth bow, the circle actually, is that they think about it as just kind of like on the side. So I explained that there's a circle and it just draw like a curved line. So it's not about it just looking like a circle. Like when you're drawing these lines, again, you're really thinking about just separating it into these big areas. So when I say a circle, I want you to go around the whole face. Like if it takes you 5, 10, 20 times, just draw a circle that goes around like this. It's not just the curve, you know, it really follows the whole kind of shape. And then we have, so that's the mouth circle. Oh, and the oval. So below that circle that really follows the mouth area, below that you have a little oval which is really going to represent the chin, and there's going to be an overlap in here. So see this right here, that's the chin, and it's an overlap of that initial circle right here. So that's where you're doing the chin and the mouth. And then we have the arch. So the arch, really what it is as I showed you here, it's really splitting the face into this jaw and into this cheek area. So it actually starts right here from the ear. It touches the corner of the eye area, and then it touches the bow. So that's where you're kind of like checking yourself. This is where it kind of like starts getting kind of like a puzzle, because up to here, you know, you could have made a lot of mistakes and it's not really gonna show. But with this arch, when you do the arch, is it gonna connect with the eye area with the bow, or is it just gonna completely miss it? So if it misses it, kind of like it misses it in me, that means that this eye area or the arch, there's something wrong with it. So let me show you exactly what's wrong. So this needs to go up a little bit more, and then this line needs to go down, because remember, this is always gonna touch right here. So as we're talking about the planes in the next tutorial, I'm gonna show you how this thing actually turns out into 5 different lines with the green. There's gonna be an additional plane in here, and the arch goes down a little bit. But the arch in the lay-in is a little bit different than the arch when it comes to the planes, because naturally when it's kind of like a low poly, like if you ever seen a face in low poly, it might be represented with like a couple of squares, but as the squares get more, you need more space, so the shape of the square changes. So it's the same in here. Imagine that this is like the lowest poly version of the face. That's what we're trying to learn, because it's the easiest. Like you can just start out with like the high poly, because it's going to be hard to understand all of these different shapes. So that's where the arch is, right here on the side of the face. It curves around from the ear down. See, it touches right here, and then it touches the bow of the nose, and then you might even go down right here for the chin. So it's not only, it doesn't end at the bow, but it goes down and it touches exactly where the chin ends. So see how it splits it. Let me show you. So see how it splits this whole thing with the green into this cheek area, into this jaw area, and then here you have the cheek area, and then in here with the purple, you have the mouth area, and then here with the teal, you have the eye area. So we're just trying to break down all of these really basic shapes of the face. So after that arch, let me just draw the other side in here. After the arch, we have the jaw. So we go back to that second circle in here, we split it, and then we find where the jaw is. You go down to the jaw, to the corner of the jaw. It's really important to always find exactly where the corner of the jaw is and to draw 2 different lines. So one line in here for the bottom side of the jaw, and then one line for the back of the jaw. Now, a lot of people just draw either one line and they make it with a curvy line, and then they lose all of the structure, or they break it down into many lines and then it looks really goofy. So what you need to do is always find that corner right here. Let me show you. With the green, see that? That's what you want to do. So this right here, boom, and you can actually use it as a measuring point. So what I explained about the measurements you look at this point right here, and then for example you connect it to this point, or you connect it to the nose, or you connect it to the corner of the eye. You're just looking at all these different lines. You can even use your pen to kind of like, even though that's kind of goofy, you can just measure out the line and then just put it on top of your drawing and just kind of look at that angle. But it's always really important to look at those key points and kind of like how they relate to each other. So you find that corner of the jaw right here and right here. You go down with one line, and then you connect the chin and the corner of the jaw. So the chin is one line, and then you have one line for the jaw, for the bottom of the jaw, and then one line for the back of the jaw. So there's really 3 lines, and on the other side there's 2 more. So it's really like 5 different lines. But it's really important that you think about the chin again as a separate sort of line. So the chin is its own sort of shape. You know, it doesn't go along with the jaw. You know, it's kind of like in here, this thing with the green, it's on its own, you know what I'm saying? And then we have the eyeballs. So the eyeballs, they're really like just a circle, and they're sitting right here in the eye shape. And it's really important to actually think about exactly where they start and where they finish. So if you look at it, it's right here where the tear duct starts, and then right here where the eyelid kind of ends. So that's where the bow is. So if you use these 2 points, you just kind of find out the other 2 points, and you just do a circle. Now, usually that eye area, again, it really depends on the angle. It really depends on the model. But for example, in here, you might see how the eye, like the line for the eye area is actually touching the bow, and then in here the bow is inside of the eye area. So that's one of those things where it might change a lot. So don't really rely on where that line touches the eyeballs. It's much more important where the eyeballs compare to each other and to the nose. So you have to almost imagine that there's like a third eyeball between these 2, and it's actually it's more like there's one extra eye between the 2. So if you put an extra eyeball, there should be right here just a little bit of space for the tear ducts. It shouldn't really touch, you know. So there should be one eyeball in here, and then the other one, and make sure that it's, you know, it's a pretty good circle, and it's the exact size. Like, that's like, I don't know why people mess up the eyeball when it's just so easy. Like, it's literally just one circle, goes from one corner of the eye to the other. And then we have the second mouth circle. So the second mouth circle is really showing you the whole muscles of the face wrapping around. So these are all of the basic planes in here. This is all you need for the lowest poly. But now these other ones, like the second mouth circle, ears, forehead, neck, and even like the lips and stuff, those are kind of like the extra smaller planes. So from here you have, let me show you in here, you have the jaw plane, you have the cheek plane, but now we're splitting it kind of like down the middle with this green line, which is showing you that this thing with the green is going to be muscles wrapping around the face, and then this thing with the purple, this thing with the yellow is going to be bone. So we're still splitting them into these 2 shapes with the blue and the red, but now this is just splitting it down the other side, you know what I'm saying? So first you think about these, and then you split it down with even smaller planes. So that's what I think about, and we have that second mouth circle, which is gonna go around like this. Now it's really important when you draw that second circle, again, wrap it around the whole face. So don't just draw it like, don't just draw like a curve like that, just wrap it around, you know what I'm saying? You might even, like, if this is kind of hard for you, you might even like start a new layer and then wrap it around and then use the eraser to kind of clean it up. But you're trying to go for like some cleaner lines. And then another really important thing is that second circle, there's gonna be it's gonna be kind of parallel to that first one. So however much space there is down here, there should be exactly that much space up here, because I see a lot of people, they just draw them super close to each other, or they draw them kind of like this, and then the other one kind of is not in the middle. Imagine that this first circle of the mouth is going to be right in the middle of the second circle. And another really important thing is that the second circle is going to touch the eyeball. So the second circle, what it is really right here. it goes around like this, and then the eyeball sits in here. So you go down from here, you wrap it around, and you make sure that it's following that first initial circle. So in here we have the first circle, then in here we have the second circle, like that. Boom. And it's wrapping around. And then we have the ears. So the ears, I just do kind of like an oval. Sometimes, especially in like 3/4, I might do a straight line in here for the jaw. So see how I just continue the jaw like this, and then I do an oval for the ear itself. And the ear, you know, usually sits right here at the bottom quarter of, you know, this circle. If you imagine that this circle is split into 4 quarters, the ear sits down here in the bottom left, or, you know, bottom right, depending on which side it is. But a lot of people get kind of confused because, you know, Loomis actually says, you know, to split this circle into 4 different quarters, which are exactly the same, and always put the ear perfectly sitting in here. But what I've kind of noticed is that it really depends on the model and kind of like the size of the ear. So sometimes the ear might go outside of the bow, sometimes might be inside of the bow. So that's just one of those things that if you can kind of cling to it, it's just kind of confuse you. So just look at, and that's why I really talk about a lot about drawing from references, because especially in the beginning, that shit doesn't really make sense. So the more you draw from references, the more it makes sense, and then at some point it makes so much sense that you can just draw it without a reference. That's kind of like the point that you want to get to. So in here we have the ear kind of like this with a straight line, and then on the side we have a straight line, and we have the ear. And then finally, we just got a couple of more things. We have the lips, which are going to be wrapping around at that bow. And the way that I want you to draw the lips for the lay-in is just one line for the center of the lips. See how it's wrapping around that bow. So if you imagine that bow, you know, it's wrapping around it like this. So you think about the center line, then you think about the top lip, and then you think about the bottom lip. So you don't draw the M of the lips and all that stuff. That's going to be later for the planes. And you just think about how it's wrapping around like this, and you just try to look for the size. Like, that's what we're trying to think about, especially, you know, with the lay-in. It's just the proportion, the size of the lips. Like, we're not trying to think about the structure of the lips, but just where do they go. Like, this is almost like lay-in is just kind of like a map for later. This is where everything goes. You know, this is the eye area, this is the eyeball, and then later on top of this we start building all of the smaller planes. So this is really like the big structure, and then all of the other smaller things come on top of this. But we got to make sure that this is right, because if this is wrong, then everything else is going to look wrong as well, because it's going to sit on you know, the wrong structure. So the lips right here for the profile, just draw them with a line like this, and then go up, and then bam, with a curve like this. That's it. Just keep it really, really simple. And then we have the forehead circle. So the forehead circle is not really that important, but I just kind of do it as a finishing touch to kind of show the roundness of the forehead, because with pretty much everything else, people just draw the forehead really flat, and it might look kind of flat in the you know, when you first look at a person. But if you look at, for example, 3/4, you can see how it's actually, again, it's wrapping around. You know, it's a more of a circular, like it's part of the bow. You know what I'm saying? So when you wrap around like a circle around it, you're showing that there's some roundness to it. And that forehead circle is going to start from the hairline, and it's going to touch the eyeballs, and it's going to go around like this. And then finally we have the neck. Now with the neck, it's really, really important to think about how it's connecting to the head. So you have to imagine that the neck is a cylinder, and it goes inside of the bow. So what you think about is, you think about a bow, and then you think about a cylinder that goes inside of that bow. So that's the cylinder, and that's the bow in here. The bow is the head, and then the cylinder is the neck. So you're really thinking about that connection. See how I make the connection with an oval? I don't just draw the 2 straight lines coming out of the bow. I really think about the connection. That's what you need to draw for the neck and for the head. So that's where kind of the oval is sitting. See that? Like, imagine if you had like a really high collar or something, or like a really high choker. That's where it's gonna sit, right? So I just draw the neck like a cylinder, and and it's going in like this. And then I also think about the bottom plane of the cylinder. See how everything that I'm drawing is wrapping around? It's always 3D. It's never just like some weird 2D lines, you know what I'm saying? It's wrapping around everything. I can't say this enough, man. I just hope that, you know, if I repeat this over and over again, hopefully you're gonna fucking remember, because people watch this shit one time and then they're like, I think I get it, and then they send it on a live stream and they, you know, are missing half of the line. So another big thing is gonna be, make sure you really watch this video a couple of times so you make sure that, you know, you have all of these lines. So let me show you them in the freehand now. And first, let me show you how to set up your file. So you put your reference in the middle, then you copy paste it, put it on 50% opacity, and you put it on the left. And then you make your background at 50% as well, and you merge all of that. So all of that is just on one layer, and then you have a second layer for the tracing and freehand. And a lot of people have this misunderstanding that, you know, tracing is like cheating or something. And honestly, I mean, if you're like tracing other people's work, you're just wasting your time. Like nothing is gonna, like you're not gonna get better that way. But for this exercise, it's really important to do the tracing first, just so you kind of get an idea of where those lines are gonna go. So the actual skill is gonna come from the freehand, but make sure you do the tracing first. And another really important thing is you do the tracing first and then the freehand, and you do them one at a time. Like I don't want you to do 20 tracings and then do 20 freehands, like just one at a time. How much time should you spend on these? It really kind of depends on your level and your understanding, but I think a good kind of like first to just get started is probably like 20-30 minutes on the tracing, and maybe like 45 to an hour for the freehand. Now if you've been drawing for a while, you know, you might draw it for like 5 minutes. Like I'm just gonna show you the real time is gonna take like 5 minutes, but really try to spend some time on these. Like try to get all of the right proportions and stuff. I mean, right now I'm talking and I'm not being as precise, but as I showed you before, like this for example, without the talking probably took me like 10-15 minutes. So if you're just starting out, it might take you like an hour, it might take you 2 hours, but it's much better to get 2 hour which has the right proportions and everything, rather than having 35-minute ones. You know what I'm saying? That it's really important to get everything right. So you do the tracing as I showed you before. You do that first. You can do it with a red color or a blue color, but it's really important when we're doing the freehand, always do black color, because the black color is really gonna be your lines. So when you do red, there's not like, you know, the shadows is fucked up and everything. The only reason why I'm doing red in here is just so I can see exactly where the lines go. But when I'm drawing freehand, always black. And another really important thing is don't shade. Like you never see me shading anything. Like in here, all of these little messiness and stuff was me before explaining like where the eye area goes and all of that. But I don't want to see anybody shade, because shading really needs to come from the big brush and kind of like big brush strokes. Like if you do the shading right now with, you know, your small brush, like think about it as if right now we're doing the pencil work, and then later with actual paint we're gonna be painting, you know. Like you don't shade with a pencil. Like pencil is just for sketching out, because if you do the shading with a pencil, your line art is gonna become messy, and then when we actually shade below that, the messy line art is just gonna stand in the way. So you never shade, you just keep it very clean. So starting out with the basic circle, we split it down the middle, we do the chop over the sides, then we have the eyebrow. You know, actually let's do the guidelines just to kind of show you the guidelines for the eyebrow. So you can kind of see how I immediately did a line of the eyebrow, and it ended up matching that one. But again, when you practice a lot, all of this proportion is going to become second nature. But in the beginning, what you really need to focus on is doing it really slowly, so you can kind of like get that mileage, so later it can become like second nature. So I keep referring back to the reference, I keep looking at like this one, and I keep looking at this. So I'm constantly looking at everything that's in the main reference, but then I look at the tracing just to kind of like remind myself what type of lines I need to do. You can also you definitely need to do that. you download all of the files from below this video, and then you can actually look at my work while you're drawing, just to kind of like get a better understanding of all of the different lines, so you don't forget any of that. So you can kind of put the reference in the middle, the tracing on the left, and right here on the furthest left you might put my work, or maybe put it on your phone just so you can kind of like look at it constantly. So you have the eyebrow, the nose, all of the features, all of that. Then we have the eye area going that way. It's really important to kind of like look at, you know, for example, how open that eye area is. Like some people, like it might be super narrow, it might be going this way. Some people, it might be going all the way up in here. So everything that I'm doing is being kind of measured with my eyes, you know. But again, if you haven't really done this before, you really need to kind of like look at all the different angles. For example, from the cheek to the eyebrow, from the nose to the eyebrow. That's why it takes like 1 hour. Like, don't get me wrong, these are literally like, you know, 20 lines. Like 20 lines are not supposed to take you an hour, but doing them in the right position, like making sure that you have the right proportion, that what takes you an hour, you know what I'm saying? So when you get better, that time is gonna drop immensely, but you need to make sure that your proportion understanding gets better as well. So I do the bow for the mouth, and then I go for the jaw. I did the nose already, kind of looking for the corner of the jaw like this, boom. Then we have kind of the ears in here. As I said, there's not really like any exact order. Like before I drew the ears last, now I'm doing it halfway just to kind of like use them as a measuring experience. Just to do the arch in here like this, connecting to the bow, and then going down like this. Then we have the eyeballs, which are going to be sitting right here. They probably need to be a little bit smaller. Now this line needs to move, so I get the eraser, kind of fade it out, then I move it, and then I go back with the eraser. Now you don't really see me using the eraser that much, but you know, if you're first starting out, that might not be the case. So I want you to really make sure that you use the eraser, make it big if you have to fade out something, like make it smaller if you really have to erase. And really like go over your lines a couple of times, make sure that they're kind of faded. But look at how sort of soft my lines are. Like I see a lot of people, I think it's the brush as well, but they end up with this really like rough and kind of like chicken scratch lines, you know what I'm saying? Like make sure that you do the exercises for that. So in here we have the lips as well, kind of like that, the overlap. We have the circle of the forehead, and then you go to the ears, and then you draw the skull. Now with the head shape, this is something that I really talk about over the tracing, that when we have the initial circle, it's really round, but when I go to kind of like establish it exactly where the head is gonna be, I draw these lines, so one on the side, one right here for the connecting, and one for the top. So it's 1, 2, 3 lines, and then 2, 1 in here. So it's kind of like 5 lines. It's actually, you know, it's really similar to the jaw. So 5 lines for the jaw, and then 5 for up top. Another really important thing is you don't draw any type of hair. So hair is going to be in the planes of the head, and right now you just think about the skull and kind of like the, you know, the outline of the skull. So let's do the measuring lines just to kind of check. See, like that mouth needs to go down. So actually the nose needs to go down, so maybe the whole thing needs to kind of get bigger. So I just press Control T. I think it needs to get a little bit more narrow, so I make it a little bit more narrow. So if you know, like as a general rule, if you know what your mistake is, like if you know it needs to move or something, you can use Photoshop tools. But I don't want you to use Liquify just to kind of like, you're not really sure what's wrong, but you just kind of want to move some things around. Like never try to fix, like if you're not sure of what your mistake is. Like if you're not sure what your mistake is, try to put it on top of the reference, or maybe like start all over. But I don't want you to just mess around with Liquify, because what happens is, let me show you, if you just move something with Liquify, it actually moves everything around it. So you might think that you're moving this arch, but see how everything around it moves, you know? So really be careful with the Liquify and all of that stuff. So that's pretty much it for the front angle. You know, we have the arch, the circle in here. Oh, the second circle, I forgot about that. So going around, kind of like touching the eyes. And another thing is, first we're thinking about, you know, the basics and trying to get all of the forms in that. But after you have that, like after you have all of the basics, you can, as I showed you, you can fade out the whole thing and then really try to make it pretty and kind of like repeat all of the important lines. So for example, in here, you see this overlapping line, like this thing with a red. When I'm kind of like repeating the important lines, I'm not repeating that one because that is not an important line. Like I'm just showing that the circle is going in there, but what is it really showing? Like an important part of the circle is going to be right here because that's going to be part of the face. This right here is just an overlap. So when you try to repeat your lines and quote unquote make it pretty, you know, you just repeat the lines that are actually kind of important. So it's really key to just think about both, to think about these both as a drawing and as a structural form, because there's really like, again, kind of two type of people. The extremist is one type of people think that it's purely like a drawing, so they don't really think about the structure that much, and then the other type think only about this really analytically, and all of their lines look really ugly. Like you're trying to make it look like a drawing of a lane of this reference. So it's a combination, and it's another it's another reason why you need to spend more time on this. Like you don't just draw it one time and then you just kind of leave it. Like you really need to go over on top of your lines, clean up some things. Like really imagine that you're gonna post this on Instagram. I mean, you won't, because it's gonna be horrible and people don't know what the fuck this robot head is doing on your Instagram. But just try to make it look good, you know what I'm saying? But do it good after you're sure of the proportions. Don't worry about it looking good if you have wrong proportions, you know what I'm saying? I forgot a bottom plane of the nose in here, like that. Alright, so that's it for this one. Now let's move on to the 3/4. Alright, for the 3/4, starting out with a circle, clean it up a little bit, then the side circle, and then the side line, and then the eyebrow line. And again, look at how faded this circle is, like, because I know I'm not going to be able to capture this person's head, I don't spend like a lot of time trying to make the perfect circle. Like I just draw something that kind of looks like a circle, and then when I have all of the features, I might erase it or just kind of move it around. Then we have the side line, and then we have the middle line in here, which is really gonna show you the angle of the face. So it's really important to actually capture the angle, because I see a lot of people, they draw all of the features and stuff, but I don't have the right angle, and that gives you the wrong sense of proportion. Again, you might notice, you might do the guidelines, to kind of like look at what's wrong with your proportions. I immediately see that I drew the nose way too up. It needs to go down. The chin as well. Like that person has a pretty big space between the chin and the nose. So I just kind of went in and I drew the general proportion of the face. Like if I look at only this drawing, this is gonna look so wrong, but again, it's kind of right for this type of person. So make sure that before you even start, you actually measure out and kind of like look at this type of person's face, so you make sure that you have the right proportion of this person. So in here, I start figuring out the eye area, going in like this, and see how this is not like straight like this, it's actually going inside of the face, remember, like this. Then we have the nose shape like that with the hoop, and then going down with the circle for the mouth like that. See how I'm cleaning it up? So if I draw like 4 or 5 circles, because I'm not able to get a perfect circle, when I decide which line I like, for example this middle one, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna erase the top one and I'm gonna erase the bottom one. Because if you just leave it like this, if you leave all of the lines with like 6-7 circles like this, or like lines, it's just gonna end up looking really, really messy, and you're not even gonna be sure exactly which line you want to leave. So it's okay if you kind of leave them faded out like this, but don't, like, make sure that you know exactly which the main line is going to be. Then in here we have an oval for the chin, then we find where the jaw is going to be. Boom, corner of the jaw. Make sure you look at, for example, I'm using this angle for the corner of the jaw to the corner of the nose, because I already know the corner of the nose. So I just look at this line and in my mind, and I actually transfer the same sort of angle, and I find the corner in here. And again, don't be kind of shocked like, wow, how are you doing that? I'm not able to do this. Like, again, it's purely just practice. Like, if you copy enough references, you're gonna be able to kind of like just look at something and then transfer it to paper. You know what I'm saying? It's not that hard. Like, it's just mileage, you know. Then in here we have the chin, we have the ear, and we have the arch. Make sure that it's connecting right here, and then it goes down. This is gonna come down a little bit. So I erase this line because I hit it kind of wrong. See, I'm still not fully committing to the lines. Like, you can kind of see how the eye area is a little bit of a darker line because it's gonna be much more important, and I'm already kind of more sure about it. Like, the initial circle is the line that I'm least committed to, you know. So the more you get committed to lines, the more you can kind of repeat them and make them darker. Then really important on the other side of the face, you know, especially for 3/4, it's really hard to draw it as a beginner. So what you do is you draw a curve going out like this, and then it's going in to the bow. So you really draw two lines. You go it out and then you draw one coming in. Like, I don't want you to just draw a straight line in here because then you make it flat. Then a little bit of erasing in here. And then the eyeballs, which are going to be sitting kind of in here. Boom. Then the other eyeball. And even if the eyeball is sitting like behind the nose, it's really important again to draw the full bow. Don't just draw a curve like this, but actually draw the full bow, and then you might use the eraser to kind of fade out this side and just leave the one that you're actually seeing. But it's really important, draw the full thing and then erase what you don't need. But don't start out with drawing what, you know, you think. It's kind of like, imagine you have like a wall hack or something, like you're seeing through everything, and you draw everything, and then you just use the eraser to kind of like fade out the things that, you know, somebody without a wall hack is not really gonna see. So in here, so you can kind of see how the more we build this thing, the more it starts looking like a head. But we started out with these really big masses, and then we got back to the smaller masses. Then in here you have the ear. What am I missing? Oh yeah, the lips. The lips in here going up like that with a curve. Then the bottom lip. Then the second circle, which is gonna touch the eyes. Let me do it again. So it's going around. See how I'm going around? Like, even though I'm not drawing it in here, I'm just still kind of repeating that line, and I'm imagining how the circle is gonna go around the whole thing. So see how it kind of gives it even more definition of the roundness of the face, because if you just draw it kind of like a curve like this, it might look round, but it's not gonna capture the whole wrapping around. Then in here I think about the neck, kind of like how it connects way back in here. It goes down like this, and then I just draw the cylinder. I draw the bottom part of the cylinder, and I just draw the neck in here, and I think about the connection. I repeat now the ear, and see, now that we have the whole face, you can kind of say like this is where the head is gonna be. Like, you already know the outlines because you have everything else. So I kind of fade out these lines in here with the eraser, and then I go up with one line. Then remember that mid kind of like line that connects this side to the top. I draw that line, and then we have the top of the head kind of going in here. It's actually gonna go just at the corner of the page, and then it goes down like this. Let's check our proportions real quick. Yeah, everything seems kind of fine. Again, if you need to kind of make it more pretty, like if this was too messy of a step for you, you might go back and erase everything and just kind of like repeat your lines in order to make them cleaner. Oh, I forgot about the circle on the forehead. Alright, finally we have the side profile. So again, start out with that initial circle. Let's do it again. Okay, that's kind of fine. A little bit of a potato back in here, but it's gonna work. By the way, if you press Control, you can actually move the circle around if it's on a new layer. And then we have the second circle in here. Then I think about this front line, kind of like Again, make sure you capture the angle of the face, so it's not just straight. You just look at this line in here from the forehead to kind of like the chin. See this red line? This is what I'm looking at. Even though the nose is coming out of it, that's gonna be the nose kind of like in itself. It's not gonna be part of this line in here. So I just think about this curve coming down like this, and then the jaw right here. Then again, you might use the guidelines to just kind of like look at the bottoms, because the guidelines are really useful for the beginning. Like later on, they're not going to be as useful because you have all these small proportions. But in the beginning, it's really key to have all of the big proportions nailed down. You have this circle in here, kind of like separating it. Then you have the eyebrow. So see how I don't just draw it straight with one line, but I'm actually exaggerating it a little bit. So I'm pushing this line in here and I'm pushing this line in here to separate that this side with the red is gonna be the side of the face, and then this thing with the blue is gonna be another part of the face. That's how you separate, you know, this what this circle represents. It's just really the side of the face. I might split this one, and then I have the nose. Let's check the proportions. Yeah, that seems pretty good. Then we have the basic shape for the eyes in here. So see now this line, see how dark it is? Like if I just go in and I start doing the nose, that's gonna look really kind of messy. So what I do is, because I know that there's gonna be a nose in here, I just fade out this line first. So I fade it out so I can still kind of clearly see where it is, because if you completely erase it and you draw a nose, then you're gonna lose some of the structure, so you don't want to do that. So you just fade it out like this, and then you look at the angle of the nose. So see how that line is really, really important. This line right here, because that shows you the angle of the nose. So if you fuck up that up, it's gonna fuck up the forehead. Is just gonna make a lot of problems. So make sure that you have that angle right. You might again put it on top of the reference. You know, look at that closely. Just measure out all of the lines. Like how you get better proportions is just measuring a lot of stuff constantly. Then in here you have the bottom of the nose, and now that you're more sure of the nose, you can fade out this line even more. But I wouldn't really recommend you removing it, but I also wouldn't really recommend you leaving it at like full opacity, because then you're gonna end up with like a really messy sketch. So just kind of leave it like that with like a faded look. Then we have the bow of the mouth. Now in the profile, obviously you're not gonna see a full circle. You're just gonna see a little bit of that side. So what I do is I draw this side of the bow, and then I just draw a little bit of a curve on this side. So I don't draw only curve in here, because that's gonna look kind of flat, and I don't draw a bow because that's gonna look out of place. So I just draw a curve, and then I draw another curve, and I make it sort of an oval where one side is gonna be more exaggerated than the other. That's how you draw the mouth in a profile view. See how I'm starting to get a lot of lines again? I just kind of fade out, and I kind of determine which one, which is the more correct line. So I just kind of repeat it like this. Then on the bottom we have a separate oval for the chin. Then in here we have the ear, kind of like boom. Make sure that you know the measurement from this line, the teal one, and how it relates to this red line. So make sure that the proportion between the green line and the red line is the same. So from here to here, you know, that's again one of those things where you just kind of like keep looking at how things relate to each other. That's really what proportion is about. So once you have the ear, you connect it from this. Oops, this actually needs to go down a little bit, or maybe the ear needs to go up. And for example, the situation that I have right now, right? Like if I just do the ear going like this doesn't touch, right? So what that makes me think is a couple of things. For example, this might mean that the eye needs to go down, or it might mean that the ear needs to go up, or that the arch needs to go up. Now the arch already looks kind of like the shape that it's supposed to have. The eye, we already measured that it's in the right place, so the only possible thing is the ear. So see how one thing, like one mistake, might give you other mistakes, because again it's all connected between each other. So what should happen is that this ear needs to go up. So when you draw that arch, it needs to be a little bit more kind of like this, and then maybe the eye needs to go down as well. Like, that's why I'm saying don't really commit to your lines, because even if you're sure of something, the more you draw more lines, the further you get along, the more you're gonna see all of your mistakes. So you gotta be careful. Then in here you go down. It's really important to look at the angle of the jaw. So this right here, even though you don't really see a line right here, you still need to imagine where the corner of the jaw is. So I go down and I go this way. Really important, don't draw this thing right here with the red. I talk more about this thing in the planes of the head, so when you get more advanced we're gonna talk about that. But for now, just draw one line like this and then only think about the neck. Don't complicate it with all of these lines in here, because that's just gonna, it's just gonna make it worse for you if you're still kind of new to this. So in here we have the lips going down, going that way. Then we have the eyeball sitting in here. So see, when I draw the eyeball, I kind of clean up the circle, and then I clean up the line that's touching the circle. So if you just, again, have all these circles going across the bow, now you can't even say, does the bow sit on top of this, or does this sit on top of the bow? When you actually clean up these lines, you're showing to the viewer that this bow is actually sitting on top of the eyebrow eye area, because you know this line is faded, which means that this is going to be sitting on top of it. Then in here I kind of exaggerate, I repeat this line. So see how I already have the full circle, but it's really faded. Now I want to draw the side of the face, but I only repeat this part of the line because that's only gonna show you, you know, the side of the face. You don't really need to repeat it all the way down in here because that's not gonna be as important. Then in here you have the circle of the forehead like that, and then we have the second circle touching the eyeball, going down, and I'm still thinking about how it's rotating, but I'm just gonna fade it out a little bit, and I'm gonna repeat this line right here. I kind of forgot about the shape of the nose. I was wondering what was wrong with that nose. I totally forgot about that side. And then repeat a little bit of the chin. This right here, kind of clean it up. So see, all of that line before, don't really need it now because you have the lips. So you just clean it up. That's what I mean by constantly cleaning up your stuff. Like, I think a lot of people, they think like, I'm drawing and then I'd be erasing. Nah, you should be erasing constantly. Like, you're constantly switching between the brush and the eraser. Like, you constantly need to make sure that everything that you're doing, like, you don't just want to stack on top of your mistakes. If you notice a mistake, just fix it right now. You don't need to wait for later, you know? So in here, I start thinking about the back of the head. So see, that initial circle was in here, but that doesn't look as right because that looks way too big. If you look at the original reference, it's way smaller. So instead, I fade it out even more, and I just correct this circle coming in like this. This is why I said that the initial circle is not that important. So I think about that kind of like coming in like this, and then I think about the neck, kind of like how it's attaching to the bow, going down like this. In the planes of the head, I'm gonna explain, you know, all of the planes in here and the connections and stuff, but for now, just think about the cylinder and the bow and kind of like how it connects. See that? Boom. And then think about how it's going down, cleaning up the lines like this. Like, when you have a really thick line like this, I just use the sculpting. So I sculpt it on this side and I sculpt it on that side, and you get a thinner line. Because if you have a really thick line and you just try to sculpt it on one side, see how the line actually moves. Like, before, it represented this shape, and when you actually erase it on one side, like, the line constantly, like, literally moves. So what you need to do is you need to use the sculpting to kind of make that line stay in the same place but just become smaller. So again, the eraser is sculpting, fading, and erasing, like completely erasing. But you really need all three of those to kind of get some good lines. And then I just kind of repeat, you know, that outside of the head. See how I don't just draw a full circle because that's gonna look really too round and kind of goofy. Instead, I break it down into different shapes. So I think about right here for the back of the head, then in here, and then kind of like two shapes in here. So I break it down more into like curves rather than just a perfect bow, because nobody's head is a perfect bow, and it just looks better if you break it down more with curves. So that's all the different angles, and now let's talk about the common mistakes. Alright, so I have some of my patrons' work right here, and I kind of wanted to go over some of the mistakes that I see all the time. And this is not like personal or anything, like it's not like let's laugh at this person or something. I just want to show you what I'm seeing all the time, so maybe you can learn from that and not do the same mistakes. So a big thing right here that we're seeing is just really wrong just features in general. Like you see that nose, how big it is. Like if you do the guidelines, you can see how that nose is way bigger than it's supposed to be, and even like the eyebrow and everything. So that's number one big mistake that I'm seeing, and I've repeated that shit a lot of times, but I still wanted to show you that even though people have seen this video, they still do it. So put your, and funny enough, in here he didn't really do that mistake in the tracing. So put your sketch on top of, you know, the tracing, and actually this is not on a separate layer so I can do it, but put your sketch on top of the tracing, really look at your mistakes and kind of like almost critique yourself. I think people like I'm definitely going to critique you on the live streams and everything, but you already have all of the answers in here. That's why we're using that. That's why we're doing that. So I think people are thinking like I'm just starting out, so I might not know my mistakes. You know, this is why I'm explaining this stuff, because if you do the tracing, it's gonna help you so much with seeing your own mistakes. So put it on top of this, look at them, and then just try to fix them, and then just repeat the process. Like go back, fix them. Don't fix them on top of here, of course. Go back, fix them, and then do it again and again. Like this is gonna take like a week or two of you just constantly fixing proportions, so you can actually have a better understanding. Then we have this person who has the guidelines, he has the good proportions, but then his lines look really bad. Now these lines, what's wrong with them is, again, as I said, he wasn't pressing lightly enough. He has these really strong lines, and then that doesn't really give you, like, see how this doesn't look as 3D, like it just looks like some random lines. So if you look at this, even though it has wrong proportions, it still looks like a head because it has better lines. But if you look at this, it has right proportions, but it doesn't really look like a head because it has bad lines. So again, it's a mixture between good lines and good proportions. So the mistake in here is that you should have went a lot more faded and then actually commit to your lines, and make sure that you're using the eraser, because this person didn't use the eraser at all and completely went in with these really bold lines and kind of like committed right from the get-go. You know what I'm saying? So make sure that you use the eraser. Then in here we have another person that has bad lines, but this is a different type of a mistake. Now these lines kind of look really scratchy. So these lines are better than this. It starts looking 3D, but again, it doesn't have that buildup. So if you look at my example, you can kind of see how some lines are faded, some lines are more harsh, and I'm going on top of them and again really developing them. This person just went one time with this like really hard brush, really small brush, and created this really inky line. So stay away from that as well. I think this is the same person, but before I gave him some critiques, I think like 1 or 2 weeks ago. So this is even worse, where not only was the lines kind of like didn't have weight, but they also look really messy. So you see all that messiness in here. That's because he didn't really clean it up. He didn't really go on top, all of that stuff. I swear, I just really wanted to repeat it all over again because, you know, I mean, if you're just starting out, maybe you just don't know. And in here, we have somebody who I'm actually really happy with. Shout out, I think this is Amio. But this is a really good lay-in. So even though, again, it's not perfect, like for example, this line doesn't go all the way. Wait, let me just start a new layer. So this line right here for the arch doesn't go all the way down to the chin. For example, the lips are a little bit off or something like that. But when you look at it, it looks really structural. You know, it looks really like an actual head, and it has form and everything. So this is gonna be really good for me to critique because it already has all the structure, all the form. So I might tell you, you know, for example, this circle needs to go down, the lip needs to go this way. Like, it's really small things. But if you send me this for critique, like, you know what I'm saying, this is so kind of rough, it's such a basic sort of mistake that I'm just gonna repeat the same thing that I said in the video. It's just kind of like improve your lines. So make sure that you really do this over and over again so you don't do the beginner mistakes. So when you send me something for a live stream, I can actually show you all of your subtle mistakes that you might not have missed. But again, it's all the practice. So this is pretty much all the common mistakes that I'm seeing, and this is pretty much the whole video. And again, make sure that you download the PDF in the description, which shows you my whole method and breakdown. Make sure you watch all of the live streams. Like, you know, I do a live stream every week. I kind of show everybody's mistakes. Make sure that, I think a lot of people is kind of really selfish, and I mean, I'm selfish too, but I think people just kind of look at their own critique and they're like, oh, I don't really care about other people. But I think you can learn a lot from other people as well. So make sure that you watch previous live stream. You know, I have 53 live streams, so that's like 2 hours a live stream. That's like 100 hours of just me talking about all these different mistakes over and over. So I'm gonna show you all the different mistakes. Check out the playlist in the Patreon. Make sure you follow everything, and make sure that I actually in the live stream tell you you need to move on to the planes. Before that, I don't really recommend you that. So send me all of your work on my email, and I'm gonna see you in the live stream, baby. I really appreciate you. Talk to you next time, baby.